The atmosphere at Fort Richardson's Medical Evaluation Center was thick with tension as Captain Mia Reeves walked through the door, her right arm hanging awkwardly at her side. The room, filled with the antiseptic smell of military precision, fell silent as she approached the reception desk. At first glance, she looked like someone who had taken a wrong turn, a clerical officer perhaps who had stumbled into the wrong building. Her weathered face showed lines of exhaustion, dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, but several strands had escaped, framing her face with wisps that seemed out of place against her otherwise impeccable uniform. She wore standard Army combat uniform, but something about her demeanor set her apart from the other soldiers waiting for their evaluations. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. What caught everyone's attention wasn't just her appearance, though it was certainly unexpected in this particular wing of the base. It was the way she moved with a quiet determination that seemed at odds with her obvious discomfort. While other soldiers in the waiting area showcased more visible injuries, casts, bandages, Brace's Captain Reeves moved with a controlled precision that masked whatever pain she might be feeling, her face betraying nothing. The clipboard she held in her left hand contained medical forms that had been filled out with painstaking detail. Each box checked with military precision, despite the obvious difficulty of writing with her non-dominant hand. The nature of her injury wasn't immediately apparent, which only added to the curiosity of those watching her approach the evaluation desk. "Name and rank," said the clerk without looking up from his computer screen. His voice carried the boredom of someone who had processed hundreds of similar cases that week alone. "Captain Mia Reeves, 75th Ranger Regiment," she replied, her voice steady and clear, carrying across the quiet room with unexpected authority. The clerk's head snapped up at the mention of her unit, his eyes widening slightly as he took in the woman standing before him. "The Rangers?" he repeated, skepticism evident in his tone as his eyes darted between her face and her seemingly undamaged arm. "What's the nature of your injury, Captain?" "Nerve damage, right arm and shoulder," Mia replied, sliding her medical file across the desk with her left hand. "Sustained during Operation Phantom Shield 6 weeks ago." The mention of the operation, a classified mission that had been briefly mentioned in military briefings, caused a ripple of whispers to the waiting room. The clerk's expression shifted from skepticism to confusion as he opened the file and began scanning the contents. "This says you're here for an injury evaluation and potential medical discharge recommendation," he said, his voice dropping slightly. "That seems excessive for what appears to be a minor injury." His eyes lingered on her arm, which showed no external signs of damage, no cast, no visible scars, nothing to indicate the severity that would warrant such a dramatic step. Mia's expression didn't change. "The medical board at my station recommended I see General Davidson for final evaluation," she said simply. At the mention of General William Davidson, the room grew quieter still. The general was the head of the medical evaluation board for the entire base, a decorated combat surgeon who had seen action in 3 major conflicts before taking his current position. He was known for his uncompromising standards and zero tolerance for what he called medical malingering, soldiers exaggerating injuries to avoid deployment or secure medical benefits. "General Davidson doesn't typically handle initial evaluations," the clerk said, the doubt in his voice unmistakable. "He reviews cases after they've been processed through standard channels." "My CO made the request personally," Mia replied, sliding another form across the desk. The authorization bore the signature of Colonel James Harmon, the commanding officer of her Ranger Battalion, a man whose reputation for demanding excellence was matched only by his reluctance to approve medical leave for his soldiers. The clerk's eyebrows rose as he examined the signature. "Wait here," he said finally. taking both forms and disappearing through a door marked authorized personnel only. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The waiting area at Fort Richardson's Medical Evaluation Center represented the pinnacle of military healthcare infrastructure. Spread across a sprawling section of the base, the complex featured diagnostic equipment that civilian hospitals would envy. Treatment facilities capable of handling everything from combat trauma to routine physicals, and evaluation rooms designed to assess a soldier's fitness for continued service with scientific precision. This wasn't a place where soldiers came for routine medical care. The evaluation center determined whether injured personnel could return to active duty or required medical discharge. Decisions that affected not just individual careers, but unit readiness and overall force capability. Every case processed through this facility represented years of military training and investment that the Army was reluctant to lose. The soldiers who found themselves in this waiting room carried injuries that told stories of service and sacrifice. Some bore visible wounds from IEDs or combat operations, missing limbs, scarred faces, bodies held together with surgical steel and determination. Others carried invisible damaged traumatic brain injuries, PTSD, exposure to toxic environments that had slowly poisoned their bodies from the inside out. All of them had earned their place in this facility through demonstrated commitment, advanced training, and proven performance under the most extreme conditions. Major Robert Collins, seated 2 chairs away from where Mia stood, represented the kind of case the facility typically handled. His right leg was missing below the knee, replaced by a state-of-the-art prosthetic that cost more than most people's cars. The artificial limb was a marvel of modern engineering, equipped with microprocessors that could adjust to different walking surfaces, an impact absorption system developed by NASA engineers, and a carbon fiber construction that weighed less than the biological limb it replaced. Collins had invested 18 months of his life in rehabilitation, working with specialists to master the use of his prosthetic and rebuild the strength needed to meet the Army's physical requirements. His medical file contained MRIs, CT scans, stress tests, and psychological evaluations that documented every aspect of his recovery with scientific precision. The thick folder represented not just his personal journey, but the Army's substantial investment in returning a valuable asset to active service. Specialist Jennifer Torres, seated near the window, carried scars that told a different story. Her face bore the marks of third-degree burns, her skin a landscape of carefully reconstructed tissue that spoke of multiple surgeries and painstaking recovery. The helicopter crash that had nearly taken her life had left her with limited mobility in her left arm, but her determination to return to her position as a combat medic had driven her through a recovery process that doctors had initially deemed impossible. Torres's medical file included evaluations from dermatologists, plastic surgeons, occupational therapists, and pain management specialists. Each report detailed her progress with clinical precision, measuring improvement against established metrics and projecting her potential for continued service based on objective standards. Her presence in the evaluation center represented a final assessment, a determination of whether her remarkable recovery had reached the threshold required for return to full duty. The hierarchy at Fort Richardson was as precisely calibrated as the diagnostic equipment its medical staff employed. Rank determined not just respect and authority, but access to the most advanced treatment options and the highest levels of care. Evaluation results influenced career trajectories, determined deployment eligibility, and opened or closed doors to programs that existed at the frontiers of military capability. General William Davidson embodied this system's values and expectations. He'd earned his position through decades of distinguished service, including tours as a combat surgeon in environments where medical skills were measured, Not in successful procedures, but in lives saved under impossible conditions. His office walls displayed photographs with Joint Chiefs, commendations from Commanders-in-Chief, and certificates recognizing achievements that remained classified years after their completion. The soldiers waiting for Davidson's evaluation understood that their time in this facility represented a crossroads that would determine their military futures. Selection for return to duty required meeting standards that few civilians could comprehend, thresholds of capability that prioritized mission readiness above personal comfort or long-term health considerations. The evaluation was not just medical but existential, a judgment on their continued value to the organization that had defined their lives. 20 minutes passed before the clerk returned, his expression carefully neutral. "Captain Reeves," he called, "General Davidson will see you now." A murmur ran through the waiting room. Soldiers who had been waiting for hours watched as Mia was escorted past them, her stride confident despite the obvious discomfort in her right arm. The implications were clear: either her case was exceptionally urgent, or someone with considerable influence had intervened on her behalf. Neither possibility aligned with what they could see: a woman with no visible injury, claiming nerve damage that warranted the attention of the base's highest medical authority. The corridor leading to General Davidson's office stretched like a gauntlet, lined with the portraits of medical officers who had served with distinction over the facility's history. Their stern expressions seemed to judge each passing case, measuring current soldiers against the standards established by generations of military physicians who had separated the fit from the unfit, the salvageable from the dischargeable, with uncompromising precision. At the end of the hallway, double doors marked with a simple nameplate, G.E.N.W. Davidson, M.D. Medical Evaluation Board, stood as the final threshold between career continuation and medical discharge. For most soldiers who passed through those doors, the experience represented the culmination of months or years of treatment, rehabilitation, and preparation. For Mia Reeves, it represented something entirely different, a confrontation she had been avoiding for 6 long weeks. General William Davidson was a man whose physical presence commanded attention. At 58, he stood 6'3", with the kind of build that came from decades of military discipline. His silver hair was cropped close to his scalp, his uniform adorned with rows of ribbons that told the story of a career spanning 3 major conflicts and countless smaller operations. His office, unlike many flag officers, was Spartan: no family photos, no personal mementos, just the tools of his profession and the symbols of his authority. The desk he sat behind was meticulously organized, files arranged in precise stacks, reference materials shelved according to a system that reflected his surgical precision. The walls displayed his medical credentials alongside his military achievements, advanced degrees from prestigious institutions, certifications in specialized surgical techniques, and patents for medical devices he developed to treat battlefield trauma. Every element of the environment spoke of expertise wielded with unyielding standards. Davidson didn't rise when Mia entered the room. He remained seated, studying the file in front of him with the intensity of a man dissecting an enemy's tactical plan. His eyes, sharp blue beneath heavy brows, remained fixed on the documents as the clerk announced her presence and withdrew, closing the door with a soft click that echoed in the silence. "Captain Reeves," Davidson said finally, still not looking up. 75th Ranger Regiment. Decorated combat record. 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq. Silver Star for actions during the Korangal Valley operation. He flipped a page. "And now you're here claiming nerve damage that warrants a medical discharge after a routine training exercise." The words hung in the air like an accusation. When Davidson finally looked up, his expression carried the weight of every soldier he'd evaluated, every career he'd ended, every standard he'd upheld against the constant pressure to maintain force readiness at any cost. "Sit down, Captain," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. The command was delivered with the certainty of someone unaccustomed to being disobeyed. Mia took the seat, her movements careful and controlled. Her right arm remained close to her body, the discomfort evident only in the slight tension around her eyes when she shifted position. She met Davidson's gaze directly, her posture reflecting years of facing superior officers across similar desks, in similar evaluations, though never with her career hanging in the balance quite like this. "Your file," Davidson continued, tapping the folder with one finger, "contains the initial evaluation from your unit's medical officer, Dr. Patel reports, and I quote, 'minimal physical findings inconsistent with the level of disability claimed by the patient.' He recommends a psychological evaluation rather than a medical discharge." Davidson's tone suggested he found this assessment entirely reasonable. "With respect, General," Mia replied, her voice steady despite the implication. "Dr. Patel's evaluation was conducted without access to my complete medical history or the classified details of the operation during which I sustained the injury." Davidson's eyebrow rose slightly. "Are you suggesting that a lieutenant colonel with 20 years of medical experience and multiple combat deployments is incapable of properly assessing a nerve injury, Captain?" "No, sir. I'm stating that he lacked contextual information essential to understanding the nature of the injury. And this contextual information is classified." The skepticism in his voice was unmistakable. "Convenient." Mia's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes, not anger, but a deeper emotion that vanished before it could be properly identified. "The operation was classified, yes, sir, as were certain aspects of the equipment we were testing during the mission." Davidson leaned back in his chair, studying her with the practiced eye of someone who had spent decades separating truth from fabrication, genuine injuries from exaggerated claims. "Captain, let me be clear. I've seen soldiers with limbs blown off fighting to stay in uniform. I've evaluated men and women with traumatic brain injuries who refused to accept medical discharge because they believed they could still contribute. And you come in here with no visible injury, claiming nerve damage from a classified operation that no one can verify?" He stood, walking around the desk until he was standing directly in front of her. "Stand up, Captain." Mia rose smoothly, maintaining the posture that had been drilled into her since her first day at West Point. "Extend your right arm," Davidson instructed, his tone making it clear this was not a request but a direct order. Mia complied, though the movement was visibly difficult. Her arm rose slowly, not reaching full extension before a slight tremor became apparent in her hand. "Make a fist," Davidson continued, watching closely. Her fingers curled inward, but the ring and little fingers remained partially extended, refusing to close completely despite the evident effort she was making. "Interesting," Davidson murmured, though his tone suggested skepticism rather than medical curiosity. "Now rotate your wrist." The rotation was limited, perhaps 30 degrees in either direction before stopping. Throughout the demonstration, Mia's expression remained neutral, though the color had drained slightly from her face. "The symptoms you're displaying," Davidson said, returning to his seat, "could be consistent with nerve damage. They could also be consistent with someone who's practiced mimicking nerve damage. The human brain is remarkably adaptable, Captain. It's entirely possible to convince yourself of physical limitations that have no organic basis." "Are you suggesting I'm faking this injury, sir?" Mia asked, the first hint of emotion, a controlled indignation, entering her voice. "I'm suggesting that the mind can create very convincing physical symptoms when there's sufficient motivation," Davidson replied smoothly. "A medical discharge with benefits is a powerful motivator, especially for someone approaching the point where deployment to another combat zone becomes likely." Mia remained standing, her posture rigid with what might have been pain or anger or both. "My service record is exemplary," Davidson interrupted, "which makes this situation all the more puzzling. Rangers don't quit, Captain. They certainly don't seek medical discharge for injuries that can't be objectively verified. He opened a drawer and removed a small device that resembled a sophisticated pen. This is an electronic dynamometer. It measures grip strength with precise accuracy. He held it out to her. I'd like you to squeeze this with your right hand as hard as you can. Mia took the device with her left hand, transferred it to her right, and squeezed. The digital readout flickered, showing a number far below what would be expected from a soldier of her training and physical conditioning. Davidson made a note on her file. Now the left hand, for comparison. The left hand measurement was more than triple the right, consistent with the strength difference one might expect with genuine nerve damage, or with someone deliberately underperforming with their supposedly injured limb. Captain Reeves, Davidson said, setting the dynamometer aside, I've evaluated thousands of soldiers during my career. I've approved medical discharges for injuries far less visible than missing limbs, traumatic brain injuries, PTSD, internal damage that leaves no external mark. I've also identified dozens of cases of what we used to call gold bricking soldiers, seeking to avoid duty through exaggerated or fabricated injuries. He closed her file with a decisive motion. Your case presents a puzzle. Your record suggests a soldier committed to service above self, yet here you are, seeking discharge for an injury that our most experienced medical professionals can't definitively confirm. Mia remained silent, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond Davidson's left shoulder. I'm going to be direct, Captain. The symptoms you're displaying could be psychosomatic. They could be deliberately fabricated, or they could be genuine. Modern medicine gives us tools to distinguish between these possibilities with reasonable accuracy. He stood again, this time moving to a cabinet on the far wall. From it, he withdrew what appeared to be a sealed medical kit. This contains equipment for a comprehensive nerve conduction study. Electrical impulses will be passed through the suspected damaged nerves, and sensors will measure the response. It's painless, non-invasive, and most importantly for our purpose is impossible to fake. Davidson placed the kit on his desk. I've scheduled the procedure for tomorrow morning at 800. A positive result will validate your claim and expedite your medical discharge. A negative result will lead to a very different conversation about the future of your military career. His tone carried an unmistakable implication. If the test showed no nerve damage, the consequences would extend far beyond denial of medical discharge. False medical claims by an officer constituted a serious breach of the military code of conduct, potentially ending her career with a dishonorable discharge rather than a medical separation with benefits. Until then, Davidson continued, you're restricted to base. Report to the medical center, East Wing, room 305, at 0745 tomorrow. Dismissed, Captain. Mia came to attention, executed a perfect about-face despite her injury, and moved toward the door. As her hand touched the handle, Davidson spoke again. One more thing, Captain. She paused, turning partially to face him. Your CO, Colonel Harmon, is not a man known for coddling his rangers. His recommendation that you see me personally rather than go through standard channels is unusual. Care to explain why he would make such an exception? For the first time since entering the office, something like uncertainty flickered across Mia's features. You would have to ask Colonel Harmon that question, sir. It wasn't my request. Davidson studied her for a long moment. I intend to, Captain. Believe me, I intend to. The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving Davidson alone with her file and the growing certainty that there was far more to Captain Mia Reeves's story than appeared in the carefully documented pages before him. Whatever game she was playing, whatever her true motivation for seeking medical discharge from a unit as elite as the 75th Ranger Regiment, he was determined to uncover it. His reputation and his unwavering commitment to maintaining the standards of the United States Army would accept nothing less. What Davidson couldn't do as he reached for his phone to call Colonel Harmon was that the truth behind Mia Reeves's injury would shake the foundations of everything he thought he knew about courage, sacrifice, and the true cost of serving one's country. By this time tomorrow, his certainty would be replaced by a knowledge that would haunt him for the rest of his career. The morning at Fort Richardson broke with the kind of pristine clarity that only Alaska could deliver, crystalline skies stretching endlessly over mountains that seemed close enough to touch, their snow-capped peaks catching the first light of dawn. For Captain Mia Reeves, however, the beauty went unnoticed as she made her way across the base toward the medical center, each step measured and deliberate despite the early hour. She'd barely slept, her night filled with memories she'd spent 6 weeks trying to suppress. The room Davidson had assigned her standard visiting officer quarters felt like a prison cell, its blank walls offering no distraction from the thoughts that circled like predators waiting for weakness. By 0600, she'd given up on rest altogether, choosing instead to walk the perimeter of the base, her right arm cradled close to her body as the cold air bit through her uniform jacket. The east wing of the medical center housed specialized diagnostic equipment that civilian hospitals would envy. Room 305, her destination, contained nerve conduction testing apparatus worth more than what most soldiers earned in a year. The technology could measure electrical impulses traveling through peripheral nerves with microscopic precision, detecting damage that even MRIs might miss. It was the gold standard for diagnosing the kind of injury she claimed, and the surest way to determine whether she was telling the truth. At exactly 0745, Mia presented herself to the technician outside room 305. The young specialist's eyes widened slightly as he checked her against his appointment list. "Captain Reeves," he confirmed, his voice carrying the deference that commissioned rank still commanded despite her uncertain status. "General Davidson said to begin setup immediately when you arrived. He'll be joining us shortly." The testing room resembled a cross between an operating theater and a computer lab. Monitors lined one wall, their screens displaying waveforms and measurement scales that would mean nothing to most people but told detailed stories to trained medical professionals. The examination table dominated the center of the room, its surface padded but unmistakably clinical, with restraints that the technician assured her were just to prevent inadvertent movement during testing. As the specialist attached electrodes to specific points along her right arm, Mia found herself studying the ceiling, focusing on the acoustical tiles rather than the procedure or what it might reveal. The door opened, and General Davidson entered, accompanied by another officer Mia didn't recognize, a full colonel with Medical Corps insignia on his uniform. "Captain Reeves," Davidson said by way of greeting, his tone professionally neutral. "This is Colonel Richard Weber, our neurology specialist. He'll be conducting and interpreting today's testing." Colonel Weber nodded, his expression revealing nothing as he reviewed the preparation the technician had completed. "The procedure is straightforward, Captain," he explained, his voice carrying the practiced calm of someone who had delivered similar explanations hundreds of times before. "Electrical impulses will be sent through your nerves at various points. The sensors will measure how quickly and strongly those impulses travel. Damaged nerves conduct electricity differently than healthy ones, slower, weaker, or sometimes not at all. The test is objective and quantifiable." What remained unsaid hung in the air. Unlike subjective reports of pain or weakness, this test couldn't be influenced by desire or deception. The results would either validate her claim or expose it as false, with career-ending consequences. "Whenever you're ready, Colonel," Davidson said, taking a position near the monitoring equipment where he could observe both the procedure and the results simultaneously. Weber moved with the efficiency of someone who had performed the same actions countless times, checking electrode placements, calibrating equipment, and entering baseline data into the system with practiced precision. Throughout the preparation, Mia remained silent, her eyes now fixed on a point somewhere beyond the room's confines, as if mentally preparing herself for what was to come. "You'll feel a series of sensations," Weber explained as he positioned the stimulator at the first test point along her wrist. Not pain exactly, but unusual like a buzzing or tingling. If you experience actual pain, inform me immediately. The first stimulus produced a visible flinch, though Mia made no sound. On the monitor, a waveform appeared jagged, irregular, nothing like the smooth curve that would indicate normal nerve function. Weber's expression remained neutral, but his eyes narrowed slightly as he adjusted settings and repeated the stimulus at a different point. Again, the response on the monitor showed clear abnormality, the electrical impulse moving too slowly, degrading as it traveled through damaged tissue. Weber continued methodically, testing multiple points along her arm and shoulder, building a comprehensive map of nerve function and dysfunction that told a story more eloquent than any verbal description could have provided. After 20 minutes, Weber stepped back, studying the composite results displayed across the main monitor. Davidson moved closer, his expression shifting from skepticism to something more complex as he took in the patterns revealed by the testing. "The results are conclusive," Weber said finally, his voice carrying the weight of professional judgment. "Captain Reeves has significant nerve damage throughout the brachial plexus, with particular severity in the ulnar distribution. The pattern is consistent with what we typically see in electrical injuries, though the extent is unusual." Davidson's gaze moved from the monitor to Mia, who remained motionless on the examination table, her expression carefully controlled despite the vindication the results provided. "Electrical injury?" Davidson repeated, his tone suggesting this information differed from what he had expected. "The file mentioned training-related trauma, not electrocution." "The nerve damage pattern is unmistakable," Weber confirmed. "High voltage exposure, I would estimate, with the current traveling primarily through the right side of the upper body. The pattern suggests the entry point was the right hand, with exit somewhere near the right shoulder or upper back." Davidson's expression hardened. "Captain Reeves, your injury report indicated physical trauma sustained during a training exercise. There was no mention of electrical injury." Mia sat up slowly as the technician removed the electrodes from her arm. "The nature of the exercise was classified, sir," she replied, her voice level despite the tension evident in her posture. "As was the equipment we were testing. Classified or not, medical information is essential for proper treatment," Davidson countered, real anger now entering his voice. "Withholding the cause of injury compromises care and recovery prospects." "I didn't withhold information from medical personnel with appropriate clearance, sir," Mia responded. "My initial treatment was at a secure facility with staff cleared for the program. The details were omitted from my transferable records due to security protocols." Davidson turned to Weber. "Prognosis?" The neurologist's expression grew more somber. "Without knowing the exact voltage and duration of exposure, it's difficult to be precise. However, the damage pattern suggests significant likelihood of permanent impairment. Recovery, if it occurs, would be partial at best. Capabilities requiring fine motor control or sustained strength in the affected limb are unlikely to return to pre-injury levels." The clinical assessment hung in the air, its implications clear to everyone in the room. For a ranger, whose life and the lives of others depended on peak physical performance under the most extreme conditions, such an injury was career-ending. The standards that made the 75th Regiment one of the most elite fighting forces in the world left no room for permanent physical limitations, regardless of how they were acquired. "Thank you, Colonel," Davidson said finally, his tone shifting subtly. "I appreciate your expertise in this matter." He turned to Mia. "Captain Reeves, report to my office at 1300 hours. We have matters to discuss that aren't appropriate for this setting." The dismissal was clear. As Davidson and Weber left the room, deep in conversation about technical aspects of the test results, Mia remained seated on the examination table, her right arm once again held close to her body. her expression revealing nothing of the thoughts behind her carefully controlled facade. The walk back to her temporary quarters gave Mia time to process what had just occurred. The test had confirmed what she already knew: her injury was real, significant, and likely permanent. Yet Davidson's reaction suggested the matter was far from resolved. His focus on the discrepancy between her reported cause of injury and the evidence of electrical damage indicated questions that went beyond mere medical evaluation. At precisely 1300 hours, Mia presented herself at Davidson's office, her uniform immaculate, despite the difficulty of dressing with limited use of her dominant arm. The same clerk who had processed her initial paperwork ushered her in without comment, though his expression suggested curiosity about the case that had caused such unusual attention from the general. Davidson was not alone. Seated across from his desk was Colonel James Harmon, Mia's commanding officer from the 75th Ranger Regiment. At 45, Harmon was the embodiment of everything the Rangers represented, physically imposing despite his age. With the kind of weathered features that spoke of decades spent in the world's most hostile environments. His presence at Fort Richardson, thousands of miles from his usual command, underscored the significance of the situation. "Captain," Harmon acknowledged her entrance with a nod that conveyed both respect and concern, an unusual combination from a man known for his emotional restraint. "Sir," Mia replied, coming to attention despite the discomfort evident in her posture. "I wasn't informed you were here." "Stand at ease, Captain," Davidson interjected. "Colonel Harmon arrived this morning after I contacted him about certain inconsistencies in your case." Mia shifted to parade rest, her left arm supporting her right in a position that minimized straying while maintaining military bearing. Her eyes moved between the two senior officers, their expressions giving no hint of the conversation that had preceded her arrival. "The nerve conduction study confirms significant damage," Davidson began without preamble. "Colonel Weber's assessment indicates the injury is consistent with high-voltage electrical exposure, not the physical trauma described in your initial report. This discrepancy raises questions that go beyond standard medical evaluation." "With respect, sir," Mia responded, "the nature of the operation during which I sustained the injury remains classified. I was following established security protocols by limiting details in non-secure documentation." Davidson's eyes narrowed. "Captain, I have held TSSCI clearance for over 2 decades. There is no operation so classified that relevant medical information can't be shared with appropriate medical personnel under secure conditions." "This one is," Harmon interjected, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had made him legendary among Rangers. "General, what I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room. The operation Captain Reeves was involved in falls under Special Access Program protocols, compartmentalized even beyond normal TSSCI channels." Davidson's expression shifted from skepticism to something more complex. Special access programs represented the highest level of classification in the military operations, so sensitive that their very existence was known only to a handful of individuals with specific need-to-know authorization. Captain Reeves was part of a technical evaluation team for next-generation battlefield technology. Harmon continued, choosing his words with evident care. "The equipment being tested was advanced, experimental. The incident that resulted in her injury occurred when a prototype malfunctioned during live operation testing." "What kind of prototype causes electrical injuries of this severity?" Davidson demanded, professional curiosity temporarily overriding his frustration with the secrecy. Harmon and Mia exchanged a glance that spoke volumes, silent communication between soldiers who shared knowledge that couldn't be fully articulated, even in a supposedly secure environment. "The system interfaces directly with the operator's nervous system," Harmon said finally. "When functioning correctly, it enhances capabilities beyond what unaugmented soldiers can achieve. The potential advantages are significant enough that the program continued despite previous incidents." The implication hung in the air. Mia wasn't the first to suffer injury during testing of this mysterious technology. Davidson's expression darkened as he processed this information, his medical training clearly conflicting with whatever strategic considerations justified such risks. "You're telling me," Davidson said slowly, "that the Army is testing technology that interfaces directly with soldiers' nervous systems, with known risk of catastrophic injury. And this program is so classified that even medical documentation is being sanitized to hide its existence?" "That's correct, General," Harmon confirmed, his tone making it clear he considered the matter closed for discussion. "And Captain Reeves volunteered for this program?" The question carried an edge of disbelief, as if Davidson couldn't reconcile the intelligence and judgment evident in Mia's record with willingness to take such risks. "All participants are volunteers," Harmon replied, the careful phrasing suggesting nuance that his direct answer concealed. Davidson turned to Mia, his expression now more evaluative than accusatory. "Captain, why would an officer with your record volunteer for experimental technology testing when you could have had your choice of combat or leadership assignments?" For the first time since entering the room, Mia's composure showed cracks not in her posture, which remained regulation perfect, but in her eyes, where something like pain or perhaps regret flickered briefly before disappearing behind professional detachment. The program offered opportunity to advance capabilities that could save lives in future operations. "Sir," she answered, the words sounding rehearsed despite their sincerity. "The potential benefits outweighed the personal risk." "That's commendable, but doesn't explain why you specifically were selected," Davidson pressed, sensing there was more to the story than patriotic self-sacrifice. Harmon shifted in his chair, a subtle movement that nevertheless drew attention. "Captain Reeves has certain neurological characteristics that made her an ideal candidate for the interface system. Her selection wasn't random or based solely on volunteering." "Neurological characteristics?" Davidson repeated, his medical interest clearly piqued despite his frustration with the layers of secrecy. "Autonomic nervous system response patterns, proprioceptive sensitivity, neuroplasticity markers," Harmon elaborated, the technical terminology suggesting briefings from specialists beyond his normal military expertise. "The interface works better with some neurological profiles than others. Captain Reeves tested in the top percentile for compatibility." Davidson leaned back in his chair, studying Mia with new awareness. "So they recruited you because your nervous system was particularly suitable for experimental technology, and then that same technology damaged that nervous system permanently." The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. "The risk was understood," Mia replied simply, though the tightness around her eyes suggested the reality of permanent injury carried weight that no pre-mission briefing could have prepared her for. "I've reviewed Colonel Weber's evaluation," Davidson said after a moment of silence. "The damage is significant enough to warrant medical discharge under standard protocols. Given your service record and the circumstances, I'll expedite the process with recommendations for full disability benefits and medical follow-up through our specialized care facilities." The words should have represented victory confirmation of exactly what Mia had requested when she arrived at Fort Richardson. Instead, they hung in the air with surprising weight, as if the official acknowledgement of her career's end carried finality that her own acceptance had lacked. "There's something more here," Davidson continued, his tone shifting from professional to personal for the first time since Mia had met him. "Colonel Harmon didn't fly 3,000 miles just to confirm details of a classified operation." "What aren't you telling me, Captain?" The question landed with precision, targeting the space between official records and hidden truth with the accuracy of a surgical strike. Mia's posture remained unchanged, but something in her expression shifted, a barely perceptible relaxation, as if a decision long deferred had finally been made. "Sir," she began, addressing Davidson but glancing briefly at Harmon, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "The nerve damage confirmed by Colonel Weber's testing is real. as is the electrical injury that caused it. What the testing couldn't show is the full extent of the modifications the program made to my nervous system before the malfunction. Davidson's expression sharpened, years of medical experience bringing immediate understanding of what she wasn't saying directly. The interface wasn't temporary, he stated rather than asked. It made permanent changes to your nervous system. Yes, sir, Mia confirmed. The technology was designed to create stable neural pathways that would enhance specific capabilities, even when the external components weren't active. The process was successful, but the subsequent malfunction damaged both natural and artificially enhanced neural structures. What capabilities? Davidson asked, the question direct and unavoidable. Mia looked to Harmon again, receiving another subtle nod of authorization. Accelerated reaction time. Enhanced tactical awareness. Improved coordination between perception and response. The system was designed to give selected operators advantages in combat situations where milliseconds and millimeters can determine survival. Human enhancement, Davidson said flatly, the term carrying weight beyond its simple meaning. You're describing a super soldier program, wrapped in enough classification to hide it from congressional oversight and ethical review. The program has full authorization at appropriate levels. Harmon interjected, his tone making it clear he considered Davidson's characterization unfair or inaccurate. Every participant understands the risks and potential consequences. Understanding risks isn't the same as truly comprehending them. Davidson countered, his medical ethics clearly at odds with the program's approach. No soldier, no matter how dedicated, can fully grasp the implications of permanent neurological modification until they've lived with the consequences. The tension in the room had shifted from confrontation over Mia's truthfulness to a deeper conflict between military necessity and medical ethics, with her damaged body as the battlefield where these competing values clashed. This changes the evaluation parameters significantly, Davidson continued, professional focus returning to his voice. Standard medical discharge processing isn't designed for injuries resulting from classified enhancement technology. The documentation alone would create security issues, not to mention the precedent for future cases. That's why I'm here, General, Harmon said, leaning forward slightly. Captain Reeves's case requires special handling, not to cover up what happened, but to ensure her continued access to appropriate care while maintaining necessary security around the program. Davidson's expression suggested he understood the subtext. Specialized care meant specialized facilities, ones equipped to deal with neurological damage to systems that officially didn't exist. Standard V, hospitals or military. Medical centers wouldn't have the expertise or clearance to treat such unique injuries properly. I assume arrangements have already been made, Davidson said, the statement not really a question. A transition team is standing by, Harmon confirmed. Captain Reeves will be transferred to a secure medical facility where both her conventional injuries and the specialized aspects of her condition can be properly addressed. Your confirmation of her medical status enables the transfer without raising questions that would compromise security. The clinical language barely concealed the human reality. Mia would disappear into a classified medical system. Her sacrifice known only to those with specific clearance. Her recovery or lack thereof documented in files that would never see public acknowledgement. It was both the best possible care for her unique condition and a continuation of the secrecy that had defined the program from its inception. Davidson was silent for several moments, his expression suggesting internal conflict between his role as a military officer bound by classification requirements and his identity as a physician committed to transparent patient care. Finally, he looked directly at Mia, his question personal rather than professional. Is this what you want, Captain? Transfer to a specialized facility rather than standard medical discharge processing. The question carried weight beyond its simple meaning. Was she still voluntarily participating in a program that had already cost her so much? Or was she being swept along by forces beyond her control? "Yes, sir," Mia replied without hesitation. Though her eyes revealed complexity, her words didn't express. "The specialized facility offers the best chance for whatever recovery is possible, and the staff there understands the unique aspects of my condition." What remained unspoken was equally important: that standard. Discharge would leave her alone with injuries few could understand and none could properly treat. Separated from the community of others who shared similar experiences and sacrifices. "Very well," Davidson said after a moment, reaching for a folder on his desk. "I'll process the necessary documentation for immediate transfer to specialized care, citing medical necessity without specifying details that would compromise classification." As he began writing, his pen moved with the efficiency of decades of medical documentation, but his expression suggested the words couldn't fully capture the reality of what he was authorizing. The official record would show Captain Mia Reeves receiving medical discharge for service-related injuries, with transfer to specialized care facilities for ongoing treatment. Technically accurate, but fundamentally incomplete. Like so many records in the shadowy world where military necessity and ethical considerations existed in uneasy balance. "Captain," Davidson said as he signed the final form, his tone more personal than at any previous point in their interaction. "Regardless of classification requirements or program security, I want you to know that what you've sacrificed won't be forgotten by those who understand its significance, even if it never appears in public records or receives the recognition it deserves." The acknowledgement, coming from a man whose career had been defined by upholding standards and regulations, carried weight that formal decorations or public commendations couldn't match. It was recognition from one professional to another, across the divide of rank and role, of value that existed beyond what official systems could properly measure or reward. "Thank you, sir," Mia replied simply, the words inadequate but sincere. As she and Harmon rose to leave, Davidson remained seated. The completed transfer authorization before him, representing both an end and a beginning, the official conclusion of one chapter in Mia's military career, and the commencement of another that would unfold in Kaza. Facilities whose very existence was known only to those with specific need-to-know clearance. What Davidson couldn't know as they departed was that his involvement in this case would mark the beginning of his own journey into questions about the boundaries between military necessity and medical ethics, between what technology could achieve and what humanity should pursue. By this time next year, his own career would take an unexpected turn, guided by the memory of a ranger captain whose sacrifice had occurred not on a battlefield visible to the world, but in a testing facility whose existence was hidden behind layers of classification that protected both national security and institutional accountability. The secure medical facility where Captain Mia Reeves found herself 3 weeks after leaving Fort Richardson bore little resemblance to traditional military hospitals. Located in an unmarked building on a restricted section of Fort Beaver, Virginia, the facility existed on no public records, its budget buried in classified appropriations that even most Pentagon officials couldn't access. From the outside, it resembled an ordinary administrative building, 3 stories of brick and glass that blended perfectly with dozens of similar structures across the sprawling base. Inside, however, was a different world entirely, a state-of-the-art medical center, dedicated exclusively to treating injuries and conditions that officially didn't exist. The staff consisted of specialists whose credentials were impeccable, but whose work would never appear on their public resumes. Scientists whose research would never be published in medical journals. And support personnel whose security clearances exceeded those of most cabinet members. The distinction highlighted the fundamental tension that had defined the program since its inception: the competing perspectives of medical professionals focused on patient well-being, and military leaders concerned with operational capability. For Chun, Mia's unique neural adaptation represented a remarkable recovery mechanism. For Madison, it suggested potential for creating soldiers whose enhanced capabilities could survive damage that would incapacitate or kill unmodified personnel. Captain Reeves's condition presents both remarkable opportunities and serious ethical considerations, Chen continued, deliberately steering the conversation back to medical rather than military implications. The integration patterns we're observing raise fundamental questions about long-term neurological stability and identity cohesion that we haven't had to address with previous participants. The clinical terminology barely concealed the human reality as enhanced neural structures assumed greater control of Mia's nervous system. Questions arose about whether her sense of self, her fundamental identity as a human being, might undergo subtle but profound changes that no one, including Mia herself, could fully anticipate. Colonel Richard Hayes, the program's legal oversight officer, recognized the implications immediately. Are we looking at potential personality alteration? Because that would trigger mandatory review under Section 5 protocols. Section 5 referred to program regulations, establishing boundaries beyond which enhancement technology could not ethically proceed. A framework created after earlier experiments had produced results that military ethicists deemed too disturbing to continue, regardless of potential tactical advantages. Not personality alteration in the conventional sense, Chun clarified, her precision reflecting awareness of the legal and ethical thresholds being discussed. Captain Reeves remains psychologically stable and consistent with her pre-injury personality profile. What we're observing is more subtle changes in information processing, sensory integration, and response patterning that reflect the increasing influence of enhanced neural architecture on overall function. The distinction was technically valid but practically ambiguous, a gray area where medical facts and philosophical questions about human identity intersected in ways military regulations hadn't been designed to address. The immediate question, Chun continued, is whether to prioritize restoration of natural function or optimization of the adaptation patterns already emerging. The approaches require different therapeutic strategies with different long-term implications for Captain Reeves's capabilities and integration back into either military service or civilian life. The options presented a fundamental choice that went beyond medical decision-making into the realm of values and priorities that defined the program's underlying philosophy. Restoration emphasized returning Mia as closely as possible to her pre-enhancement state, preserving human fundamentals at the cost of capabilities that might be developed through embracing the emerging adaptations. Optimization would capitalize on the unique neural reorganization occurring naturally, potentially creating unprecedented capabilities but moving Mia further from conventional human neurology. "What does Captain Reeves want?" asked Major Lisa Turner, the program's psychological support director, the only person in the room whose primary responsibility focused on participants' mental and emotional well-being rather than their physical function or operational utility. The question seemed to catch several participants by surprise, as if the notion of Mia's preferences influencing treatment decisions represented a variable they hadn't considered relevant to the discussion. "She hasn't been presented with the options in these terms," Chun admitted. "The adaptation patterns have only become clear in the past week, but based on my interactions with Captain Reeves, I believe she would want full information about both approaches before making any decision." Madison frowned slightly. "This is a medical determination, not a matter for patient preference. Our responsibility is to make the decision that best serves both Captain Reeves's recovery and the program's objectives." "With respect, General," Turner interjected, her tone professional but firm, "program protocols specifically require informed consent for any treatment approach that substantially alters recovery trajectory or functional outcomes. Captain Reeves's status as a program participant doesn't nullify her rights to medical autonomy within the parameters established by program regulations. The reminder of established protocols shifted the dynamic in the room. Legal and ethical frameworks reasserting themselves against the natural tendency of military hierarchy to streamline decision-making through command authority. Major Turner is correct, Hayes confirmed, his legal perspective aligning with ethical considerations in this instance. Section 3 clearly establishes participant autonomy requirements, particularly for cases involving novel or unprecedented recovery patterns. Captain Reeves must be fully informed of the options and potential consequences before treatment direction is determined. Madison's expression suggested frustration, but also recognition of boundaries he couldn't simply override through rank or authority. The enhancement program existed in a complex space where military command, medical ethics, legal requirements, and emerging technologies created constraints and considerations that traditional military operations didn't encounter. Very well, he conceded. Dr. Chun, you'll present both approaches to Captain Reeves, with appropriate documentation of potential outcomes and implications. But I want it clearly understood that her decision will be reviewed for program alignment before implementation is authorized. The compromise reflected the reality of operating within a classified program where individual autonomy existed within boundaries defined by national security considerations and military objectives, a constrained freedom that participants accepted as condition of their involvement. As the meeting concluded, Chun remained behind, organizing her notes while the others filed out. Turner paused at the door, turning back to address Chun privately. "You know what Madison wants," Turner said quietly once they were alone. "He sees Captain Reeves as proof of concept for a new direction-enhanced soldiers, whose capabilities survive damage that would incapacitate conventional personnel. The decision may be Mia's officially, but the presentation will shape her choice." Chun nodded, the gesture acknowledging both the observation and the responsibility it placed on her as Mia's primary physician. "I'm aware of the General's perspective. I'm also aware of my obligations as a medical professional. Captain Reeves will receive complete and unbiased information about both approaches, regardless of program preferences." The commitment represented a small but significant act of resistance against the tendency for classified programs to prioritize objectives over individuals, a quiet assertion of medical ethics within a system where national security often served as justification for compromises that would be unacceptable in civilian contexts. The following morning, Mia sat across from Chun in the doctor's private office rather than her treatment room, the change of setting itself signaling the importance of the conversation. The office reflected Chun's personality, meticulously organized, focused on function rather than comfort, with the only personal touches being diplomas and certifications that established her expertise rather than revealing anything about her life beyond professional achievements. "Your recovery has reached a critical junction," Chun began, her directness as always foregoing unnecessary preliminaries. "The adaptation patterns we're observing in your neural architecture present options for treatment direction that require your informed decision." As Chun explained the emerging pattern-enhanced neural pathways, assuming functions previously handled by natural structures, creating unprecedented integration between technological and biological systems, Mia listened with the focused attention that had characterized her military career. The technical details were complex, but the fundamental choice became increasingly clear: attempt to restore natural function as fully as possible, or embrace and optimize the adaptation patterns already emerging naturally. The restoration approach would prioritize regeneration of damaged natural neural structures, Chun explained, displaying comparative scans on her tablet. "We would essentially be working against the adaptation patterns currently developing, redirecting your brain's plasticity toward conventional human neurology. The advantage would be greater alignment with standard human function, potentially easier reintegration into conventional military roles or civilian life if that becomes your preference. The option represented the more conservative medical approach, working to return Mia as closely as possible to her pre-injury state, minimizing the long-term impact of both the enhancement and the damage it had suffered. The optimization approach would work with rather than against the adaptation patterns already emerging, Chun continued. We would support and guide the integration process, potentially resulting in capabilities beyond what either conventional human function or the original enhancement design could provide separately. The disadvantage would be moving further from standard human neurology, with implications for both military deployment options and civilian integration that we can't fully predict. The alternative represented embracing the unique opportunity presented by Mia's specific injury pattern, potentially creating capabilities never before seen but moving into territory where medical certainty gave way to educated speculation about long-term outcomes. What you're not saying directly, Mia observed, her perception cutting through the clinical terminology to the heart of the matter, is that optimization might make me more valuable to the program, but less recognizably human in some fundamental ways. Chun's expression revealed respect for the insight. That's an oversimplification, but not entirely inaccurate. The enhanced neural structures operate according to principles that differ from natural neurology. As they assume greater functional control, your sensory processing, information integration, and response patterns would likely develop characteristics that fall outside conventional human parameters. Would I still be me? The question went beyond medical specifics to the philosophical core of the choice, the relationship between neurological architecture and personal identity. Psychologically, yes, Chun replied, her certainty genuine despite the unprecedented nature of the situation. Core personality structures, memories, values, and sense of self appear stable regardless of which neural systems are processing them. But your experience of the world, how you perceive and interact with your environment, would likely develop characteristics that most humans wouldn't share or fully understand. The distinction offered both reassurance and caution, identity preserved, but experience potentially altered in ways that might create distance between Mia and others who hadn't undergone similar neural reorganization. What would you do if you were me? Mia asked, the personal question unexpected from someone who had maintained professional distance throughout her treatment. Chun considered the query with evident care, recognizing it as request for guidance rather than abdication of decision-making responsibility. Medically, both approaches are valid. Restoration represents the safer option, with more predictable outcomes and fewer unknowns. Optimization offers greater potential, but with corresponding uncertainties. She paused, then continued with unusual candor. If I were in your position, my decision would depend on how I saw my future. If I wanted to return to something resembling my previous life, either military or civilian, I would choose restoration. If I were willing to embrace a future defined by unique capabilities, but potentially greater separation from conventional human experience, I might choose optimization. The framework didn't provide an answer but offered a perspective for approaching the decision that acknowledged both medical facts and personal values, a rare moment of physician guidance that respected patient autonomy while providing meaningful context. How long do I have to decide? Mia asked, her military training asserting itself in focus on practical parameters rather than philosophical implications. 48 hours would be optimal, Chun replied. The adaptation patterns are still developing. Delaying beyond that time frame would make the restoration approach increasingly difficult as neural reorganization becomes more established. Mia nodded, her expression revealing nothing of the internal calculus already working through the decision's implications. I'll have my answer tomorrow morning." As she left Chun's office, Mia carried more than medical information. She carried awareness that her decision would influence not just her own future, but potentially the direction of the enhancement program itself. Her unique condition represented both opportunity and warning, a glimpse of possibilities that could redefine the relationship between human capability and technological advancement in ways that went far beyond conventional military applications. What Chun couldn't know as the door closed behind her patient was that Mia's decision would ultimately challenge fundamental assumptions about the program's purpose and ethical boundaries. By this time next month, the quiet captain with the damaged arm would become the focal point for questions that reached beyond medical rehabilitation into the heart of what it meant to be human in an age where technology could rewrite the very neural architecture that defined human experience. Mia spent the 24 hours following her meeting with Dr. Chen, not in the medical facility's treatment rooms or rehabilitation spaces, but in its small courtyard, the only place where patients could experience something resembling the natural world. The space was carefully designed, large enough to allow walking without feeling confined. Planted with trees and flowers selected for psychological benefit rather than decorative value, and surrounded by walls high enough to ensure privacy, while still allowing glimpses of sky that connected patients to the world beyond their medical isolation. She had requested solitude, a rare privilege in a facility where most patients remained under constant observation. The request had been granted with surprising ease, perhaps because the staff understood the weight of the decision she faced, or perhaps because monitoring systems embedded throughout the courtyard made physical supervision unnecessary. Whatever the reason, Mia found herself alone with her thoughts for the first time since her injury, free to consider her options without the subtle influences of others' expectations. The fundamental choice before her represented more than a medical decision about treatment direction. It touched on questions about identity, purpose, and how she defined her value both to herself and to the world she had sworn to protect. Restoration meant working toward becoming again what she had been, a exceptional soldier, but fundamentally human in all the ways that defined the term. Optimization meant embracing the unique integration of technology and biology that her injury had inadvertently created, becoming something unprecedented with capabilities that might serve purposes no one could fully anticipate. As twilight deepened over the courtyard, Mia found herself remembering conversations from her early days in the enhancement program, discussions with other volunteers about why they had chosen to participate despite the risks involved. Some had spoken of patriotism, others of pushing human boundaries, still others of seeking capabilities that might save lives in future conflicts. Her own motivations had been complex, a mixture of duty, curiosity, and belief that frontline operators like herself had responsibility to test technologies that might eventually be deployed more widely. "You're still out here," said a voice from the courtyard entrance, breaking into her thoughts. Major Lisa Turner stood silhouetted against the light from the building, her expression hidden in shadow but her stance suggesting concern rather than intrusion. "I have until morning to decide," Mia replied, not moving from the bench where she had spent much of the day. Turner approached, her movements unhurried, deliberate in the way of someone who had learned that patience often revealed more than direct questioning. As the program's psychological support director, she had developed a reputation for insight that penetrated the practiced stoicism of operators like Mia, finding the human vulnerabilities beneath professional facades. "Mind if I join you?" Turner asked, pausing a respectful distance from the bench. Mia gestured to the empty space beside her, the invitation wordless but clear. As Turner sat, neither woman spoke immediately. The silence between them comfortable rather than awkward, the shared understanding of those who had seen beyond conventional boundaries into spaces where ordinary frameworks failed to provide adequate guidance. "Dr. Chun explained the options," Turner said finally, her tone suggesting statement rather than question. Yes, Mia's response was minimal, revealing nothing of her internal deliberations. The program has strong opinions about which choice serves its interests, Turner continued, her candor unusual in a facility where careful phrasing typically masked institutional preferences. General Madison sees potential in your condition that extends far beyond individual recovery. The observation confirmed what Mia had already intuited, that her unique neural adaptation represented opportunity from the program's perspective. Possibility for developing capabilities that might not have been achievable through intentional design. "And what do you see?" Mia asked, turning to study Turner's face in the fading light. Turner considered the question with evident care, her expression suggesting internal calculation about professional boundaries and personal ethics. "Officially, I see a patient facing a complex medical decision with significant implications for long-term well-being and functional capacity." "And unofficially?" Turner's smile was brief but genuine. "Unofficially, I see someone being asked to make a choice that shouldn't fall entirely on individual shoulders. The implications extend beyond personal recovery to questions about what we're creating in this program and whether the direction serves purposes we can fully justify." The assessment cut to the heart of tensions that had defined the enhancement initiative from its inception, whether advancing human capability through technological integration represented progress or transgression of boundaries that existed for fundamental reasons. The question wasn't new, but Mia's condition had given it immediate practical significance rather than theoretical abstraction. "What would you choose?" Mia asked, the same question she had posed to Chun but now directed toward someone whose perspective centered on psychological rather than physical implications. Turner's hesitation suggested the question touched on personal as well as professional considerations. "I believe in human potential," she said finally. "Our capacity for growth, adaptation, integration of experience into expanded understanding. But I also believe that being human means existing within certain limitations that define our shared experience and connect us to each other." The philosophy was nuanced, but its implications for Mia's choice remained ambiguous. Turner seemed to recognize this, continuing after a moment's reflection. "The optimization approach offers capabilities we can't fully predict. It might create function beyond anything we've seen before. But it would also place you on a path diverging from shared human experience, perceiving and processing the world in ways others can't access or fully understand." The observation echoed concerns Mia had been considering throughout the day, not fear of the unknown, but recognition that enhanced capabilities might come at cost of connection with the very people such capabilities were intended to protect. "Soldiers already experience that divergence," Mia noted. "Combat creates perspective civilians can't fully comprehend." "True," Turner acknowledged. "But combat experience remains within human parameters, extreme human experience. Certainly, but still fundamentally accessible through shared emotional architecture. What the optimization approach might create would be qualitatively different, perception and processing so altered that the underlying experience might not translate through conventional human understanding." The distinction was subtle but crucial between experience that stretched human parameters and function that operated outside them entirely, creating potential isolation not just from civilians, but from fellow soldiers whose neural architecture remained conventional despite whatever psychological differences combat had created. "You're suggesting optimization might make me more effective but less connected," Mia said, articulating the concern that had circled through her thoughts throughout the day. "It's a possibility worth considering," Turner confirmed. "Enhanced function without corresponding connection raises questions about purpose. Capabilities serve human objectives, ultimately. If those capabilities create distance from human experience, the alignment between means and ends becomes harder to maintain." The philosophical framing provided perspective. Mia hadn't fully articulated in her own deliberations that capability separated from connection might serve immediate tactical objectives while undermining the broader purpose those objectives were meant to support. As full darkness settled over the courtyard, lights activated automatically along the pathways, casting pools of illumination that emphasized the boundary between natural space and constructed environment. Mia stood, stretching muscles stiff from hours of minimal movement, her damaged arm responding with less fluid motion than her uninjured one. "Thank you for your perspective," she said simply. "I have decisions to make before morning." Turner rose as well, recognizing the conversation's natural conclusion. "Whatever you decide, remember that adaptation isn't just physical. Your mind will find ways to integrate experience, create meaning, establish connection regardless of which treatment path you choose. That resilience is part of being human, whether your neural architecture remains conventional or develops in unprecedented directions." The reminder carried reassurance that transcended the specific decision. Mia faced affirmation that identity persisted through change, that meaning could be found in circumstances that defied conventional categories or expectations. As Turner departed, leaving Mia alone again with her thoughts, the courtyard seemed somehow less isolated than before, connected to larger questions about human potential and purpose that extended far beyond the facility's secured walls. Morning arrived with the clarity that often followed difficult decisions fully considered. Mia presented herself at Dr. Chun's office at precisely 0800, her appearance reflecting the military discipline that remained central to her identity regardless of her medical status, uniform impeccable, despite the difficulty of dressing with limited arm function. Posture straight but not rigid, expression composed but not closed. Chun looked up from her desk as Mia entered, setting aside the tablet she had been studying with a gesture that suggested full attention rather than interruption. "Captain Reeves, you've made your decision?" "Yes." Mia took the seat across from Chun without waiting for invitation, a small assertion of agency appropriate to the circumstances. "I've considered both options and their implications, both personal and programmatic." Chun's expression remained neutral, professional interest masking whatever preferences she might hold personally regarding the choice before her patient. "And your decision is?" "Neither option as presented," Mia replied, the answer clearly unexpected based on Chun's momentary expression of surprise. "I'm proposing a third approach that incorporates elements of both, but serves different objectives than either restoration or optimization as you've defined them." Chun leaned back slightly, her surprise giving way to professional curiosity. "I'm listening." "The enhanced neural structures are adapting to compensate for damaged natural pathways," Mia began, her explanation reflecting careful consideration of the technical information Chen had provided. "Rather than either working against that adaptation or maximizing it for performance enhancement, I propose guided integration focused on sustainable function rather than capability optimization." The distinction was subtle but significant, neither returning to conventional human neurology nor pushing toward maximum enhanced capability, but instead developing stable integration that balanced function with sustainability and connection. "Interesting," Chun responded, genuine engagement evident in her tone. "You're essentially proposing a middle path, allowing the adaptation to continue, but with boundaries that preserve certain aspects of conventional neural function while incorporating enhanced capabilities, where they serve recovery objectives." "Precisely," Mia confirmed. "The goal would be integrated function that maintains core human experience while incorporating enhanced capabilities that compensate for permanent damage. Not restoration to previous state, not optimization for maximum performance, but integration for sustainable capability within parameters that preserve essential human connection." The proposal represented more than medical compromise. It reflected philosophical position on the relationship between technology and humanity, capability and connection, enhancement and identity. Shun seemed to recognize the deeper implications, her expression thoughtful as she considered both practical implementation and broader significance. Technically feasible, she said after careful consideration. We would focus on guided neural reorganization, rather than either resistance or acceleration of the adaptation patterns already emerging. The approach would require development of new treatment protocols, but the fundamental principles align with established neurological theory regarding brain plasticity and functional integration. What remained unspoken but understood was the deviation from program. Preferences that Mia's proposal represented neither the conservative medical approach of restoration nor the capability-focused direction of optimization that would serve the program's more ambitious objectives. General Madison will have concerns, Shun noted. The observation neutral but significant, given the program's hierarchical structure and the general's influence over treatment decisions. The procedural explanation carried implicit recognition that Mia's proposal had shifted the decision from purely military domain to medical ethical space where different authorities and considerations applied a subtle but significant realignment of power dynamics within the program's complex governance structure. I understand, Mia acknowledged. I'm prepared to defend the medical rationale if required. My focus remains recovery of maximum sustainable function within parameters that serve both my personal well-being and potential future service, whether within military or civilian contexts. The formulation was carefully balanced, neither rejecting military values nor subordinating personal well-being to program objectives, establishing position that acknowledged multiple legitimate considerations without privileging any single perspective as exclusively authoritative. Shun nodded, her expression suggesting professional respect for both the substance of Mia's proposal and the thoughtful strategy behind its presentation. I'll prepare the necessary documentation and treatment protocols. The review process will take approximately 72 hours, during which current rehabilitation approaches will continue as previously established. As Mia rose to leave, Chun added something unexpected, words that moved beyond professional assessment to personal perspective rarely shared in their previous interactions. Your approach reflects wisdom that transcends medical considerations, Captain. Integration that preserves essential human connection while embracing necessary adaptation may prove more valuable than either restoration of past function or optimization for maximum capability. The observation carried weight beyond its immediate medical context recognition. That Mia's proposal might have significance for the enhancement program's future direction, and perhaps for broader questions about technology integration that extended far beyond military applications. Thank you, Doctor, Mia replied simply, recognizing both the professional assessment and the personal perspective it contained. 3 days later, Mia found herself facing not just Dr. Chun and General Madison, but the program's full oversight committee, a group that rarely convened in person due to the classified nature of their work and the senior positions most members held outside the program. Their presence in the facility's secure conference room underscored the significance of decisions being considered, not just regarding Mia's specific treatment, but potentially the program's fundamental approach to human enhancement technology. General Madison sat at the center of the conference table, his expression suggesting barely contained frustration with proceedings that had expanded far beyond the straightforward treatment decision he had anticipated. Beside him sat Admiral Catherine Wilson, whose position on the Joint Chiefs gave her perspective that balanced immediate military objectives against broader strategic considerations that extended beyond any single service branch or program. Dr. Robert Keller, the program's chief scientist, occupied position that physically placed him between military leadership and civilian oversight representatives, an arrangement that symbolized his role bridging operational requirements and scientific ethics. His expression as he reviewed documentation before him suggested intense interest in Mia's proposal beyond its immediate application to her specific case. The civilian contingent included Dr. Margaret Chun, no relation to Mia's physician but distinguished neurologist whose pioneering work in neuroplasticity had established foundations upon which much of the enhancement program's technology had been developed. Her presence carried authority that even Madison's military rank couldn't easily dismiss, scientific expertise that transcended organizational hierarchies. Judge Advocate General Representative Colonel James Reynolds completed the oversight group, his role ensuring adherence to legal frameworks that governed even highly classified programs operating at the frontiers of both technology and ethics. His expression as proceedings began suggested professional neutrality, focus on process and precedent rather than specific outcomes. "Captain Reeves," Madison began, his tone formal but with undertone suggesting skepticism regarding her proposal. "You've presented alternative treatment approach that deviates from both standard rehabilitation protocols and specialized enhancement optimization recommended by program medical staff. The committee has reviewed your proposal and supporting documentation and will now consider both medical appropriateness and programmatic implications." The framing attempted to establish evaluation criteria that would privilege program objectives over individual preference. But Mia recognized structure that actually worked in her favor by acknowledging both medical standards and program considerations. Madison had inadvertently created space where civilian medical authorities could assert perspectives that might counterbalance purely military objectives. Captain Reeves's proposal demonstrates sophisticated understanding of both neurological principles and enhancement technology integration, Dr. Margaret Chun observed, her scientific authority immediately shifting the conversation's focus. The approach she advocates represents potentially significant advancement in our conceptualization of human technology integration, sustainable symbiosis rather than either resistance to technological augmentation or subordination of human parameters to performance optimization. The assessment carried weight that transcended the specific medical decision under consideration, suggesting broader implications for how enhancement technology might develop beyond immediate military applications. Madison's expression tightened slightly, recognition that the discussion was expanding beyond parameters he could easily control through rank or authority. "Our primary consideration must remain operational capability," he countered, reasserting military perspective. The enhancement program exists to develop capabilities that provide tactical advantages in combat environments. Captain Reeves's proposed approach prioritizes subjective considerations over performance metrics that directly impact operational effectiveness. The distinction was clear between human-centered approach that considered subjective experience alongside objective capability, and mission-centered perspective that prioritized performance regardless of subjective implications. The tension wasn't new, but Mia's proposal had brought it into sharp focus through specific treatment decision that required explicit rather than implicit resolution. "General, with respect," Mia interjected, her tone professional despite the inherent challenge of addressing officers so far above her rank. "The approach I've proposed doesn't sacrifice operational capability. It focuses on sustainable integration that maximizes long-term effectiveness rather than short-term performance enhancement that might prove unstable or counterproductive in actual field conditions." The reframing was subtle but significant, shifting evaluation criteria from immediate performance metrics to sustained capability under actual operational conditions, where factors beyond raw capability often determined mission success or failure. Several committee members nodded slightly, recognition that field reality often differed from laboratory optimization in ways that performance-focused development sometimes overlooked. Captain Reeves raises valid point regarding sustainability versus optimization, Admiral Wilson observed. Her perspective carrying weight of someone who had overseen actual combat operations rather than theoretical capability development. Our experience with previous enhancement technologies suggests that integration with human operators represents greater challenge than raw performance enhancement. Capabilities that can't be effectively integrated with human decision-making and operational context provide limited tactical advantage regardless of laboratory performance. The support from such senior officer shifted the dynamic noticeably, creating space for perspectives that balanced performance considerations with human factors that ultimately determined whether enhanced capabilities translated into actual operational advantages. Dr. Eleanor Chun, who had remained silent during initial exchanges, now added medical perspective that further supported Mia's proposal. The treatment approach Captain Reeves has outlined represents sound medical practice focused on sustainable recovery and functional integration. From purely medical perspective, her proposal offers potentially superior long-term outcomes compared to either conventional restoration or experimental optimization approaches. The unified medical assessment from both program physician and civilian authority created foundation that even Madison's military perspective couldn't easily dismiss without explicitly subordinating medical standards to non-medical considerations. Position difficult to defend even within classified program operating outside conventional oversight. As discussion continued, Mia observed subtle but significant shift in the committee's orientation from evaluating her specific treatment decision to considering broader implications for the enhancement program's fundamental approach to human technology integration. Her individual case had become catalyst for reassessment of assumptions that had guided the program's development, opportunities for perspectives that had been present but subordinated to performance-focused objectives, championed by Madison and others sharing his orientation. 4 hours later, as the committee prepared to render formal decision regarding her treatment, Mia recognized that outcome would extend far beyond her personal recovery. The principles established through this process would influence not just her specific case, but potentially the program's future direction and perhaps the broader evolution of human enhancement technology beyond classified military applications. Having considered all relevant perspectives, Admiral Wilson announced, speaking for the committee after extensive deliberation, we approve Captain Reeves's proposed treatment approach focusing on guided neural integration within parameters that balance enhanced capability with sustainable human function. This approval establishes precedent for similar cases and directs program research to incorporate sustainable integration as core objective alongside performance enhancement in future development. The decision represented more than individual treatment authorization. It established principle that human factors deserved consideration alongside performance metrics in enhancement technology development, potentially redirecting program resources and priorities in ways that would influence capabilities developed for future operators. 6 months later, Mia stood at the observation window overlooking the facility's primary rehabilitation space, watching new participants working through early stages of the enhancement program. Her own recovery had progressed according to the integrated approach she had advocated, neither returning entirely to conventional human neural architecture nor optimizing for maximum enhanced capability, but instead developing sustainable integration that balanced function with connection to shared human experience. Her right arm would never regain full natural function, but the guided integration of enhanced neural pathways with remaining natural structures had created capabilities that served both personal recovery and potential future service. She could now perform complex tasks requiring fine motor control despite permanent damage to natural neural pathways. Integration of enhanced structures, creating new capabilities that compensated for what had been lost, without moving beyond parameters that maintained essential human connection. They're implementing your protocols with all new participants, said a voice from behind her. Dr. Eleanor Chun approached the window, her expression suggesting professional satisfaction with developments that had followed the Oversight Committee's decision months earlier. Not just my protocols, Mia corrected, acknowledging contributions beyond her individual case. The integration approach incorporates perspectives from across disciplines: medical, psychological, operational. It represents collaborative understanding rather than individual insight. Chun nodded, accepting the correction while still recognizing Mia's catalytic role in the program's evolution. Nevertheless, your case established principle that now guides our entire approach to enhancement technology. Integration rather than optimization. Sustainable capability rather than maximum performance. Balance rather than single-minded focus on tactical advantage, regardless of human implications. The observation wasn't exaggerated, despite Mia's modesty regarding her influence. Following the Oversight Committee's decision, the program had undergone significant reorientation, research priorities shifting toward sustainable integration rather than pure performance enhancement. Evaluation criteria expanded to include human factors alongside technical capabilities. Success metrics redefined to incorporate operator experience alongside objective performance measurements. General Madison had initially resisted the changes, his performance-focused orientation challenging adjustments that seemed to prioritize subjective considerations over measurable capabilities. But operational testing had vindicated the integrated approach, demonstrating that enhanced operators functioning within sustainable parameters consistently outperform those optimized for maximum capability, but lacking integrated function across extended operations. The evidence had been compelling enough that even Madison had eventually acknowledged the practical advantages of approach that balanced enhancement with integration. What comes next for you? Chun asked, the question addressing future Mia had been considering throughout her recovery. The medical board has cleared you for limited duty, though not for return to ranger operations. There are positions within the program that could utilize your unique perspective and experience. The options before Mia represented choices similar to those she had faced regarding her treatment between paths that emphasized different aspects of her capabilities and identity. She could remain within the enhancement program, contributing to development of technologies and protocols that would influence future operators' experiences. Alternatively, she could transition to conventional military roles compatible with her physical limitations, or even civilian positions where her unique capabilities and perspective might serve different but equally valuable purposes. I've accepted position with the Integration Development Team, Mia replied, her decision reflecting months of consideration. Working with new volunteers, helping them navigate the balance between enhancement and identity, capability and connection. The experience I've gained through my own recovery provides perspective that technical experts or uninjured operators can't fully offer. The choice reflected commitment to principle that had guided her own treatment decision integration that preserved essential human connection while embracing necessary adaptation. Balance between capability and sustainability that served broader purpose beyond immediate performance enhancement. As new participants moved through their training routines below, demonstrating early stages of the enhancement process that would eventually create capabilities beyond conventional human parameters, Mia recognized her own journey reflected in their experience navigation between potential and limitation, technology and humanity, capability and connection that define not just the enhancement program, but broader questions about human evolution in an age of accelerating technological integration. What neither she nor Chun could fully anticipate as they watched the program's evolution was how principles established through Mia's case would eventually influence development far beyond military applications. medical technologies that would help patients recover from neurological damage, interface systems that would expand human capability without sacrificing essential connection, approaches to human technology integration that would balance enhancement with preservation of qualities that define shared human experience. 6 years later, as civilian applications of technologies originally developed within the classified program began emerging in medical and commercial contexts, Mia would find herself in position to influence their implementation based on principles she had helped establish, guiding integration that served human flourishing rather than narrow performance metrics, advocating balance between capability enhancement and preservation of connection that made capabilities meaningful. The battle scars that had ended her career as a ranger had ultimately created opportunity for contributions that extended far beyond what her original military service might have achieved, influence not just on tactical capabilities but on fundamental relationship between humanity and technology at moment when that relationship was being redefined through innovations whose implications extended beyond any single application or context. The injury report that General Davidson had once viewed with skepticism had revealed truth far darker, yet ultimately more transformative than anyone could have anticipated. Not just physical damage that ended one career path, but catalyst for evolution in how human enhancement technology would develop across both military and civilian applications for generations to come. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.